She almost didn't go back. For 11 weeks after Thomas died, Vivian Ashford walked past the corner of Birch and Forth every single morning on her way to the post office, and every single morning she looked at the hand-painted sign above the green door. Hennessy's Books, established 1967, and kept walking. She told herself it was because she wasn't ready. She told herself the grief was still too fresh, too porous, that stepping inside would be like pressing a bruise before it had time to heal into something she could live with. But the truth, the one she only admitted to herself at 2 a.m. when the house was too quiet and Thomas's reading chair sat empty in the corner of the den like a held breath, was that she was afraid of what she wouldn't find there. She was afraid of ordinary absence. She was afraid that the shop would just be a shop, dusty and dim and indifferent, and that Thomas would simply be gone from it the way he was gone from everything else. She was wrong, but she wouldn't know that for a while yet. Welcome to the Lamplit Hour, where every story is a small light left on for someone who needs it. If stories like this bring you comfort, take a moment to subscribe and stay a while. Vivian had been married to Thomas Ashford for 51 years when a Tuesday morning in October took him. Not dramatically, not with any of the fanfare that 51 years might seem to deserve. He had been reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, the same table where they had eaten every breakfast since 1989, the one with the ring stain from a coffee mug that had belonged to her mother, and the small carved initials T+V 1973 that Thomas had pressed into the soft wood with a pocket knife when he was being romantic and slightly reckless the year they moved into the house on Sycamore Street. He had been reading the newspaper, and then he wasn't. The paramedics told her it was his heart, and she thought, yes, of course, his heart. It was always his heart. That was the trouble with loving someone the way Thomas loved, openly, quietly, constantly. It left his heart with very little protected space. He was 78 years old. She was 76. They had lived in Millhaven, Indiana their entire lives, which is to say, they had lived inside a particular kind of small-town grace that people from elsewhere sometimes mistook for smallness, but was in fact a kind of richness, the richness of knowing every crack in every sidewalk, of being known in return. Millhaven had a hardware store that still mixed paint by hand. It had a diner called Patsy's, where the pie was made from scratch each morning, and the coffee was strong enough to count as an opinion. It had a public library with a reading garden that Thomas had helped plant 30 years ago, when the friends of the library needed volunteers and he had shown up with good gloves and better intentions. And it had Hennessy's Books, the used bookshop on the corner of Birch and Forth, which Thomas had treated for the better part of 4 decades, less like a business and more like a second home. He went every afternoon, not sometimes, not most days, every afternoon, 5 days a week, with the reliable devotion of a man who has found one of the few places on earth where he feels completely himself. He would go after lunch around 1 o'clock, and he would stay for an hour or two, longer in winter when the light went early and the shop's interior, lit by 2 floor lamps and a string of warm bulbs along the back wall, felt like the coziest room in any building in any town. He had a particular section he loved: the history shelves, the biography shelves, and a long, low shelf near the front window that held what the owner, an elderly man named George Hennessy, who is now in his 90s and rarely came in himself, had labeled simply "Stories Worth Keeping." Thomas loved that label. He thought it was the most honest and dignified thing you could write above a row of books. Vivian herself was not a woman who read slowly. She was a quilter, a gardener, an occasional terrible painter of watercolors that she kept in a stack in the upstairs closet with cheerful self-deprecation. She read certainly, but she read the way she did most things, with brisk purpose, extracting what she needed and moving along. Thomas was the opposite. Thomas read the way other men fished, not for the catch exactly, but for the quality of the time spent, the particular stillness that the activity created around him. He would read one book for 2 weeks and then talk about it for a month. He kept pencils in his shirt pocket. He wrote in the margins of books, which Vivian found slightly maddening, and which Thomas defended with a gentle stubbornness she had long ago learned to love rather than argue with. "A book is a conversation," he used to say. What kind of person sits in a conversation and doesn't say a word? After Thomas died, the house on Sycamore Street became very quiet in this specific way that houses become quiet when the person who gave them their particular rhythm is no longer there. Vivian kept things tidy. She had always kept things tidy, but now she found herself cleaning in a slightly compulsive way, straightening objects that were already straight, as though order might be a kind of company. Her daughter Ellen called from Columbus every Sunday evening, and her son David called on Wednesdays, and the neighbors brought casseroles for the first few weeks with the sincere and helpless generosity of people who know that food cannot fix anything, but cannot bear to offer nothing. Vivian was grateful. She said so honestly, without false brightness. She had never been a woman who performed fine when she wasn't. The grief was not the sharp, spectacular kind she had read about in novels. It was more like weather, like the particular gray of a November sky that sits over Indiana for weeks. Not stormy, not dramatic, just present. A persistent, low, encompassing thing that changed the quality of light over everything and made certain hours of the day, the early evenings especially, feel long in a way they never had before. She walked every morning. She had always walked, but now she walked with a different intention, or rather with no particular intention at all, which was new for her. She walked to feel the cold air and to see the town doing what the town did, to wave at people she knew, which in Millhaven was most people she encountered. She walked past Patsy's and smelled the coffee, and sometimes went in for a slice of apple pie. She ate at the counter without a book, just looking out the window at Birch Street and feeling slowly the edges of herself returning. It was on one of those mornings, a gray Wednesday in early January, that she stopped in front of Hennessy's books and did not keep walking. She couldn't have explained exactly what was different about that morning. The sign was the same, the green door was the same, its paint slightly flaking at the lower left corner in the way it had always flaked. And for the past decade, Thomas had meant to offer George Hennessy a bit of touch-up paint and had never quite gotten around to it. The window display was a little changed. Someone had arranged a collection of old atlases and travel memoirs around a small globe, which was pretty, but otherwise it was exactly the shop it had always been. Vivian stood on the sidewalk and looked at the door for a long moment, her scarf wound twice around her neck against the January cold, her hands in her coat pockets, and then she opened the door and went in. The bell above the door made its small, bright sound. It smelled the way it had always smelled, which is to say it smelled of paper and dust and something underlying those, something that might have been wood polish, or might have been simply time, the particular scent of years settling into things. The 2 floor lamps were on. The string of warm bulbs along the back wall was on. Behind the front counter, a young woman Vivian didn't recognize looked up from a paperback and smiled. "Morning. Feel free to look around. Let me know if you need anything." "Thank you," Vivian said. She stood just inside the door for a moment, adjusting. The shop was narrow and deep, with shelves running floor to ceiling along both walls and a freestanding, double-sided shelf down the center aisle. It was not a large shop. It was the size of a generous living room, and it had the feeling of a room that had accumulated meaning over time, that had absorbed something from the people who came to it regularly and loved it without quite saying so. Vivian had been inside Hennessy's books perhaps a dozen times over the years, mostly to find Thomas, when she needed him for one thing or another and didn't want to wait. She had never come alone. She had never come to browse. She found herself walking toward the back, past fiction, past poetry, past a small section of cookbooks that seemed incongruous and charming. And then she was standing in front of the history shelves, which were Thomas's shelves, and she stayed there for a moment, just breathing. She reached out and touched the spine of a book, a thick, orange-covered history of the American Civil War, the kind of book Thomas would have loved. And the simple act of it, just touching a spine on a shelf where his hands had reached 1,000 times, was enough to bring her eyes to the edge of stinging. She blinked it back. She was not going to cry in George Hennessy's bookshop. She had decided that before she even opened the door. She took the Civil War book down. She opened it. Thomas had not written in it, or if he had, whoever sold it to the shop had not been Thomas, and she put it gently back. She moved along the shelf. She took down a biography of Eisenhower and a slender volume about the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, and a history of small-town Indiana that had been printed by a regional press in 1978, its cover soft with age. She opened each one and looked inside and put each one back. She wasn't sure what she was doing precisely. She was not yet sure she was doing anything at all beyond standing in a place that had mattered to him and trying to let that be enough. She bought the Indiana history book, mostly because she thought she might actually read it. And she walked home through the cold morning with it under her arm. And that night she sat in Thomas's reading chair, the first time she had sat in it since he died. And she read 30 pages before she fell asleep with the lamp on. She went back the following Wednesday, and then the Wednesday after that. By February, it had become a habit, quiet and unannounced, something she did not mention to Ellen or David because it felt private in a way she couldn't quite explain. She would come in the morning when the shop was mostly empty, and she would spend an hour moving through the shelves, pulling down books, looking at them, sometimes buying one, sometimes not. The young woman at the counter, her name was Lily, Vivian learned, the granddaughter of a woman Vivian had gone to high school with, was pleasantly unobtrusive in the way of people who understand that a bookshop is, among other things, a place where people sometimes need to be alone in company. It was on a Thursday morning in late February, which was an unusual day for her to come, that she found the first note. She had pulled down a book from the Stories Worth Keeping shelf near the front window, a novel she had vaguely heard of, something about a town in Georgia and the people who lived in it through many decades. And she opened it to the first chapter, and something caught her eye. A faint mark in the upper corner of the second page. She tilted the book toward the light from the window, and she saw it clearly then. Pencil, soft and small, in handwriting she knew as well as she knew her own name. Vivian would like this one. The woman at the beginning reminds me of her mother. She stood very still. She looked at it for a long time. Her heart was doing something she couldn't quite categorize. Not quite aching, not quite soaring. Something that was both at once, a single sustained note in a register she had no word for. She turned to the front page and looked at the flyleaf, and then she looked at the publication date inside. The book had been printed in 1998. Someone had bought it used at some point and sold it. And at some point after that, it had come to Hennessy's. The pencil mark was Thomas's. She would have known it anywhere, that particular slope of his capital M, the way he always wrote the G without lifting the pencil. Lily, she said, and her voice came out more evenly than she expected. Do you have any sense of when this book came in? Lily came around the counter and looked at the small penciled price in the top corner of the first page. That's George's handwriting for the price, and he stopped pricing things himself maybe 10 years ago. So at least 10 years, probably more, she paused, looking at Vivian carefully. Are you all right? Yes, Vivian said. I'm going to buy this one. She took the book home and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and read the first chapter slowly, and then she went back and read the margin note again, and then she sat for a long time, looking out the window at the backyard, where the garden was still bare and gray, but where she knew from 50 years of watching this particular piece of ground that the crocuses were already working their way up through the cold soil, doing their slow and faithful work in the dark. The woman at the beginning reminds me of her mother. Thomas had been inside that shop with that book in his hands, and he had thought of her, and he had written it down. Sometime in the past 20-some years, he had stood somewhere in Hennessy's books and thought about her mother and about her. And he had taken the pencil out of his shirt pocket and left that thought behind. He had not bought the book. He had set it back on the shelf, and here it was, 20 years later, or 15, or 10, waiting for her to find it. She pressed her hand flat against the page, against his handwriting, and she did cry then, but not in the way she had feared. It was not the hollow kind of crying that grief had sometimes given her in these past months. It was something older and more complicated, something that had gratitude threaded through it. She went back to the shop the next morning, a Friday, and she went straight to the stories worth keeping shelf, and she began methodically and unhurriedly to take down every book on it and open to the first few pages and check the margins. On the fourth book, a collection of stories about Appalachian families, the cover worn soft at the corners, she found a note at the top of the third page. If Vivian ever reads this, she'll understand what I mean when I say these people remind me of her Uncle Harold, the stubborn one. They're all stubborn, but especially him. She made a sound that was half laugh and half something else entirely. If this story is staying with you, a quiet light helps me keep the lamp lit for others. She went through the stories worth keeping shelf that morning and found 2 more notes, both faint with age, both in that familiar hand. One was just a date and a small star drawn next to a sentence in the text. She read the sentence, which was about a woman watching her children leave a church after a baptism, and she understood immediately why he had started, because he had always said that the moment he loved most in his life, the one he kept coming back to, was watching their daughter Ellen be baptized. Well, the light came through the church windows, and Vivian stood beside him in a yellow dress she had sewn herself. The other note was a simple observation: good book to read aloud to someone you love. She sat in the wooden chair near the front window for a long time after that, holding the book. Lily brought her a cup of tea from somewhere in the back and set it on the small table beside the chair and said nothing at all, which was exactly right. Over the following weeks, Vivian began to understand what she was doing and what she had found, and the understanding came gradually, the way the best understandings do, assembling itself from pieces rather than arriving all at once. She had found a trail. Thomas, with his pencils and his afternoons and his 50 years of loving her in the particular way he loved, quietly, specifically, with great attention to small things, had left a trail inside the books of Hennessy's books, and the trail was addressed to her. He had known, she was certain of it, not with certainty, perhaps not even consciously at first, but he had known the way that people who love each other for long enough sometimes know. He had known that she would come here after he was gone, that the shop would pull her back the way it had always pulled him, and that she would look inside the books because that was what a person did when they were in a used bookshop and wanted to feel close to the person who had stood here before them. He had been leaving messages. For how long she didn't know. For years. Quietly, unhurriedly, with no expectation of credit and no particular plan, he had been writing small things in the margins of the books he held and then setting them back on the shelves, like a man dropping seeds into winter ground, trusting that eventually, in the fullness of time, something would find the light. She moved through the shop systematically over the following weeks, section by section, shelf by shelf. She was not frantic about it. She was not desperate. She moved through it the way you move through something when you understand that the point is not to reach the end, but to be fully present for each moment of the passing. Some books had nothing. Most books had nothing. And then one would yield up his handwriting in the margins, always faint, always particular, always addressed, however obliquely, to her. In a biography of Harry Truman, near the back, Vivian always said, Truman reminded her of her father. I think she's right. There is something in the plainness of him. In a novel about a woman who runs a bakery in Vermont, I don't know if Vivian would like this book. She'd say the main character doesn't know her own mind, but she'd finish it. She always finishes things. In a slender book of essays by a naturalist who had spent a year living near a marsh, she would like the part about the herons. She has always liked herons. I don't know why I never told her that I know that. That one she held for a long time. It was Lily who helped her find them more efficiently. Once Vivian had explained, haltingly and with some difficulty, what she was doing and why. Lily was 24 years old and studying library science part-time, and she had a heart that was good in the particular way of young people who have not yet had it tested very hard, but are building the right kind of character for when they eventually are. She listened to Vivian's explanation with complete seriousness and without any of the awkward brightness that people sometimes brought to conversations about grief, as though enthusiasm might substitute for understanding. When Vivian finished, Lily was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "He must have loved you very much." "Yes," Vivian said, "he did." And then, because it was also true, "I loved him the same way." Lily began to help. She had been working at the shop for 3 years and knew the inventory in the way of a person who has spent hours in the presence of things, not catalogued exactly, but sensed, the way a gardener knows where everything in a garden grows without necessarily having written it down. She would sometimes bring a book to Vivian without explanation, just a small inclination of her head toward the margins, and Vivian would look and sometimes find something and sometimes find nothing. And either way, she was grateful for the company of the search. March came, slow and tentative, the way March in Indiana always comes. A day of warmth followed by a week of cold, the light changing almost imperceptibly each morning, the birdsong coming back in pieces. Vivian's garden began to wake up. She went out in the mornings before her walk to check on things, to see what was coming and what hadn't made it through the winter, and she found herself talking quietly to the plants in the way that gardeners sometimes do, the way she had always done, the way Thomas had always gently teased her about and secretly found deeply endearing, which she knew because he had told her so many times, which was one of the 1,000 things she had loved about him, his willingness to say so. She found a note in a collection of poems by a Kentucky poet she had never heard of, tucked on a low shelf near the poetry section. The note was on the page facing a poem about an old farmhouse in winter, the way a particular window catches the last light of the afternoon. Thomas had written, in his small, sloping hand, "This is the poem I would have written, if I could have written poems. She is the window." She had to put the book down. She stood with her hands on the shelf and her forehead briefly touching the backs of the books in front of her, just for a moment, just until she could breathe evenly again. Then she picked the book back up and bought it and carried it home and set it on the nightstand on his side of the bed, which she still thought of as his side, because what else would she call it? There were, in the end, 23 notes. She found them over the course of nearly 3 months, each one at its own pace, in its own time. She did not hurry. She began to understand somewhere around the 12th or 13th note, that hurrying would be a kind of loss, that each one she hadn't yet found was still, in some sense, Thomas, still with her in a form she hadn't yet touched. She let herself have that. She moved through the shop each morning slowly, and she drank the tea that Lily made, and she sat in the wooden chair by the window and watched Birch Street do its small-town business outside. And she was, in a way she could not have predicted and would not have asked for, not entirely unhappy. The 23rd note she found on a morning in mid-April, a Wednesday, the windows of the shop slightly open for the first time that year, and the smell of spring coming through the gap, cut grass and damp earth and something floral from the planters that someone had put out on the sidewalk down the block. It was in a book she had overlooked twice, a thin book with a plain blue cover, no title on the spine, shelved slightly sideways so that it had been hidden behind the taller book next to it. She almost missed it entirely, and then didn't, because she had been looking carefully for a long time now, and careful looking becomes its own kind of skill. The book was a journal, a published journal, written by a man who had spent a year walking the counties of Indiana in the 1970s and writing down what he saw: small towns, fields, rivers, county fairs, the names of people he met at gas stations and general stores. It was not a famous book. It was the kind of book that only exists in the back rooms of used bookshops in the towns those journals were written about, which was perhaps why it had made its way to Hennessy's eventually, and why Thomas had held it in his hands. Thomas had written in this one more than any other. There were small stars next to passages that mentioned things he knew. A description of a town that sounded like Millhaven, a county fair that might have been the same fair they had gone to in the late 70s with the children small, and Ellen eating cotton candy until she was sick on the way home in the car. There were small check marks beside observations about the landscape that Thomas had found true. And on the last page of the book, in the white space below the final line of text, he had written something longer than anything else she had found. She stood at the shelf, reading it, and then she carried the book to the wooden chair by the window and sat down, and she read it again slowly in the April light, with the sounds of Birch Street coming through the open window and Lily moving quietly somewhere in the back of the shop. He had written, "I don't know when Vivian will find this. I like not knowing. I like thinking about her finding it. I have left her things in these books because I have never been good at saying everything I want to say all at once, and also because she deserves to be surprised by love, which she has been good at giving and modest about receiving. If she is reading this, she has come back to this shop, which means she has found her way back to things she loves, which means she is going to be all right. I know she will be all right. She has always been the braver one. She just doesn't know it. I want to say, the garden is hers now, to do with as she likes. The reading chair is hers now, and I hope she sits in it. The town is full of people who love her, as I have loved her, and she should let them. I have been a lucky man. I want her to know I knew that every day." Vivian sat in the wooden chair for a long time after reading that, watching the street outside, and she did not try to stop what came. She cried quietly, in the good way, the way that grief and love do together when they have been held long enough that they trust each other, and she let Millhaven go about its morning outside the window. A woman pushing a stroller, a man with a coffee cup waving at someone across the street, a dog trotting purposefully along the sidewalk on some private errand. And she felt the particular quality of what it was to be known, to have been seen fully and over time by another person, and to have that knowing set down carefully in the margins of books so that it would outlast the person who had done the knowing. She bought the journal. Of course she bought it. She bought it, and she carried it home under her arm through the spring morning, and she put it with the others, the collection she had made on the low shelf in the den. the shelf she had cleared of other things to hold these books with his writing in them. 23 books, 23 small pieces of him, left where he knew she would find them. She went back to Hennessy's the following week, and the week after that. She goes still every Wednesday morning, sometimes Thursday. She has, in the way of people who return to a place long enough, become a fixture. Someone Lily makes tea for without being asked, someone the regulars nod to, someone who knows where the new arrivals get shelved and sometimes looks through them, not searching anymore, or not only searching, but reading in the way she has learned to read since Thomas died, which is slower and more attentive and less briskly purposeful than before. She reads with a pencil sometimes, not to write, at least not yet, just to have it there, in her hand, the weight of it, the specific possibility of it, in case she has something to say. The shop on the corner of Birch and 4th stays lit all morning. The string of warm bulbs along the back wall stays on, the floor lamps stay on, and the small light above the door that George Hennessy put up in 1967, and that has never been changed, just rebulbed every so many years quietly by someone who notices when a light goes dim, stays on. In Millhaven, people who walk past on winter evenings sometimes look in at the warm interior and see the old woman in the wooden chair by the window, and they feel something that they might not have a precise word for, the feeling of seeing a place exactly as it ought to be used, a place doing the thing it was made for. The town keeps this small warmth the way towns sometimes do, without ceremony, without much comment, just a chair, just a lamp, just a woman reading with a pencil in her hand and a cup of tea going cool on the table beside her, in a shop full of books that hold, in their margins, the quiet record of a man who loved her well and made sure she would know it. Some lights go on and stay on. Some people leave so much of themselves behind that absence becomes its own kind of presence. In a handwriting, in a margin note, in a shop that smells of paper and time, and something underneath those, something that might be love set down in pencil, faint and certain, waiting to be found. Thomas Ashford is gone from Millhaven in the way that people go, irrevocably, tenderly, not all the way. And on the corner of Birch and 4th, the light in Hennessy's books is on. Every afternoon, the way it has always been, the way Vivian suspects it always will be. Thank you for spending this hour with me. These are the stories I carry closest. Ordinary people, quiet rooms, the small and lasting ways we say I was here, and I loved you, and I didn't want you to forget. If you'd like more stories like this one, subscribe. And I'll leave the light on for you next time. Rest well.